Essentially, this is a truce. This is a one-year truce, a trade truce between the United States and China. And there's still question. Markets are going to welcome this.
Yeah.
But there's still a question about will this hold?
There is this principle of sovereign immunity, which protects state assets from seizure by other countries. Otherwise, we'd be doing this all the time.
Venezuela has made claims to a very large section of neighboring Guyana. It's a region called Essequibo, because it's a sparsely populated and oil-rich region. And if you look at a map, it's a pretty big chunk of the country. Hi, I'm Dhruva Jaishankar.
And I'm Rachel Rizzo. Welcome to the Around the World podcast, your essential guide to understanding the forces shaping our world today. Every week, we cut through the noise to bring you clear, insightful analysis of the most important developments in geopolitics.
Whether it's security challenges across Europe, shifting power dynamics in Asia, domestic updates from the United States, or regional updates from Latin America or the Middle East, we'll make sure you're up to speed on what's happening and, more importantly, why it matters.
Thanks for tuning in, and be sure to like and subscribe the Around the World podcast on Spotify and YouTube. Dhruva, happy Friday.
Happy Friday.
How was your week?
Interesting, good. We had a conference on U.S.-China relations this week. A lot happening around the world, so a pretty eventful week.
Yeah, as we said last week, it's newsy as usual.
Yes.
On the topic of Asia, that is one of the topics we are going to be chatting about today. We have a full docket. We're going to chat about Trump's Asia trip. We are going to talk about what is going on with these discussions about frozen Russian assets in Europe. We kind of mentioned this on the show last week, so we'll do a little bit more of a deep dive today. And then we are going to go down to South America and talk about what is happening with the U.S. and Venezuela. So to get us started, let us start in the Indo-Pacific region. Trump, big Asia trip. What have you been watching? Is there a deal? What should we be looking at here?
Yeah, so U.S. President Donald Trump went to Asia this week, his first major trip to Asia in his second term. The stops included Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur for the ASEAN and APEC meetings, ASEAN and East Asia Summit meetings.
Okay.
He oversaw their sort of agreement between Thailand and Cambodia. They'd been fighting between the two countries. This is actually a case where ASEAN, an organization that has been in for a lot of criticism, actually helped broker an agreement at the end. But the United States, Trump wants to see himself again as the peacemaker. And so there was a little bit of like, well, let's pretend to, give him sort of greater credit than is perhaps due for this. The original agreement was signed a little while ago in the presence of Chinese and U.S. officials. So that was one thing there. Then he goes to Seoul. Then he goes to Japan.
Okay.
The Japanese lay out the red carpet for him. It's his first meeting with the new Prime Minister of Japan, Sanae Takaichi. We spoke about this a little bit last week, that this was going to be a test for her, but they really rolled out the red carpet for him. He seemed really pleased. They did a deal on rare earths, which seems to be kind of a standard practice nowadays in all of Trump's negotiations. But then what everyone was paying attention to was him going for this APEC summit to Seoul, to South Korea. And this is the first meeting of Trump and Xi Jinping, China's leader, in Trump's second term, first face-to-face meeting. They've spoken on the phone before. And what everyone was looking for was there going to be a deal, a trade deal between the United States and China, the world's two largest economies. At periods of time, they had over 140% tariffs on Chinese goods to the United States earlier this year. They've since come down.
Yeah, it's all we've been talking about, it seems like.
Yeah. So the short version is we got a ceasefire.
Trade, you mean?
Yes, we got a U.S.-China ceasefire on trade when Xi and Trump met. This was hammered out by negotiators in Kuala Lumpur just a few days before the meet. Now, a few things. Briefly, what the U.S. gets and what Trump gets out of this is a resumption by China, a commitment to resume rare earth magnet exports, and to crack down on fentanyl, and a commitment to buy soybeans and other agricultural products from the United States. Now, these are all important because these really advance the rare earths are really needed. At this point. China has the United States over a barrel on that issue. But the others are kind of more politically oriented, which is before the midterms next year. Trump wants to make sure that there's an increase in exports of American agricultural goods because that matters. China, in turn, gets tariffs reduced a little bit. It'll be about 47%. I think we're looking at. So the fentanyl tax, essentially 20%, has been dropped to 10%.
Okay.
And a delay on American export restrictions, and possibly, although there's some mixed reporting coming out now, continued access to advanced AI chips. So this is kind of what both sides get out of the deal. A few things, though, to keep in mind. Nothing as yet has been signed.
Oh, it hasn't. So we're still waiting for...
They've announced an agreement, but so far no pen to paper. Again, this may change in the next few hours or days.
Could there be some changes in between the discussion and what's signed?
It's unclear why, but we'll see. Nothing has been signed yet, again, as of this recording. That could change. But essentially, this is a truce. This is a one-year truce, a trade truce between the United States and China. And there's still markets are going to welcome this.
Yeah.
But there's still a question about will this hold? And we've seen, again, evidence, whether it's with the U.S. and Canada or others, where some of these things, or the U.S. and China in 2017, where some of these agreements haven't really held. And both are going to try and seek advantages in these few areas over the next year as well.
So Trump went to the Indo-Pacific. Obviously, the meeting with the new Japanese Prime Minister was on the top of the agenda. Obviously, this meeting with Xi. One term I did not hear you use in this discussion was the Quad. Was there any discussion on the Quad during this visit, or is that sort of maybe for other times, other issues, other people?
I think that's a good question. I think that remains to be seen. There was an opportunity. India is not a member of APEC, so India was not going to be. Last year, the Commerce Minister participated in the APEC summit, but India is not a regular attendee. The occasion that would have been the occasion is the East Asia Summit in Malaysia, and India's Prime Minister Modi decided not to go, partly because there hadn't been sufficient progress on a U.S.-India trade deal.
Oh, that makes sense.
So you had the Japanese, Australian, India, U.S. leaders there, but no Indian, and so there was no opportunity for a Quad, like a side meeting, which in the past it would have been something like that, quite possibly.
Yeah.
There's some talk. I mean, Prime Minister Modi did speak to the Japanese Prime Minister a couple of days ago, and in the Japanese readout, they mentioned the Quad as well. There's some talk about a meeting in India in early 2026. But again, it'll come down to whether there's progress on a trade deal, whether whether their political appetite is there, and whether schedules align.
Okay, so we'll watch this closely, and we'll probably do a Quad deep dive at some point.
One small thing that's happening, though, there is a U.S.-India Air Force exercise, and at least it has been reported the Japanese and Australian participants will be there. So it's kind of a Quad Air Force exercise that may happen next week, in 2 weeks' time.
Where's that?
I think it'll be in India this time, COP India exercises.
Okay, we'll watch it.
So again, there's some sort of very regular stuff, day-to-day stuff happening between the militaries, between the foreign ministries, the four governments, but there's not yet a summit in sight. Possibly early 2026.
Okay, good to know. We'll keep our eye on it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Moving a little bit to Europe. So after Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, there was this question of Russian central bank reserves that were in European banks. Yeah. And there's been this sort of ongoing debate about what to do about it. So maybe talk us through where that debate stands right now and what might change.
Yeah, absolutely. So for anyone listening who has been following the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine, and maybe how the U.S. and Europe can keep supporting Ukraine, you have definitely heard about the potential to use frozen Russian assets to support the Ukrainians. And I think it deserves a little bit of a breakdown because it's kind of a confusing financial mechanism. So after Russia's invasion in February of 2022, Western countries went ahead and froze about $300 billion worth of Russian central bank reserves. 185 billion euros of these are held at what's called Euroclear, and this is a Belgium-based central securities deposit. And in early 2024, you had the G7 countries finalize a $50 billion loan to Ukraine, and this was backed by interest generated from the frozen assets. You kept hearing these words, this phrase, windfall profits. And so that was that discussion about a year and a half ago. But interest payments are declining, which means that you can't get as much money from them anymore, and Ukraine still needs funding. So the question is, you have 185 billion euros sitting in this Belgian bank, sitting in Euroclear. Can the EU use this in some way to support Ukraine?
Yeah, so that is the question. Can they use this in some way? And so can they?
It's super complicated. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. She proposed what they're calling a reparations loan of up to 140 billion euros that would basically use the frozen Russian assets as collateral rather than relying on the actual assets. And so they're not going to use the actual assets, and there are reasons for that.
So what are some of the reasons?
So under international law, a sovereign country's assets can't just simply be confiscated. There is this principle of sovereign immunity, which protects state assets from seizure by other countries. Otherwise, we'd be doing this all the time. Markets would be a mess. It would undermine the international financial system, risk retaliation, create legal problems. So the EU, what they're doing, they've had to find a workaround to this.
So what's the workaround?
So basically the plan as of now is that the EU would lend Ukraine up to 140 billion euros at 0% interest. And this would only need to be repaid by Ukraine if Russia pays Ukraine reparations. So we have sort of a triangular financial trick going on there, sort of a round robin, as we used to call it in the finance industry. The loan would be guaranteed by the EU's next long-term budget or by individual member states. So they can give the Ukrainians the loan, and if Russia doesn't pay reparations, which I don't think it is anytime soon, the loan is guaranteed by European funds. Obviously, because Euroclear is based in Belgium has been super on the fence about this. They want guarantees that the risk is going to be shared with other European countries. And obviously, national parliaments are going to need to agree on this, which makes it pretty complicated. So what we're now looking at, you had the EU Council Summit last week where they discussed this. They punted it until the next EU Council Summit in December. And at that point, they will discuss it further. They'll talk about what's feasible. And then hopefully we will have a clear answer by early 2026. But something that is not going to be solved in the next couple of weeks or couple of months. I think we're looking at a pretty long-term discussion here.
So we're looking at some pretty complicated and layered financial kind of mechanisms that are being used, to generate. So without actually touching the reserves, because it's a sovereign issue. But I was talking to some Belgian officials a few weeks ago, and they said one of the other concerns is just like they're worried about the precedent it might set.
Totally.
Right. And that basically Europe as a whole, and Belgium in particular, would lose some of its credibility. And this is in their view that it would lose its credibility as a financial a trusted financial partner, essentially. And so how much do you think that sort of stuff still weighs on?
I think it weighs hugely on not only the Belgians, but other European countries as well. When you set precedent like this, it means that when you seize another country's assets, no assets are safe. And as I sort of mentioned before, we don't know what that would mean for European or for international financial markets, but it would certainly undermine them. So this is sort of a way to get around confiscating the actual assets, but using them in a way that is sort of financially mechanized and creative so that the Europeans aren't actually seizing the assets. My colleague actually at the Atlantic Council, Charles Litchfield, he's in our geoeconomics team. He's super interesting on this, worth reading if you haven't. But as I mentioned, we'll watch this closely and give you all updates as they come available. And so on that, just kind of wrapping up our round robin of a discussion, heading down to South America. The other thing that you've probably been paying attention to, if you've been watching the news here in the U.S., is the fact that we seem to be going down to Venezuela and bombing boats or shooting boats down. Can you tell us what's going on down there so that we have... I'm not even sure what's going on.
A little bit, and with the caveat that this is not an area I follow that closely, but it has some interesting spillover effects in other areas, which is partly why sort of it is of interest to people who don't follow the region.
Yeah.
But essentially the Western Hemisphere writ large has been a central focus of the second Trump administration. If there's one thing there's actually been some consistency about there, it is that the senior Trump administration officials have focused a lot on the Western Hemisphere, whether it was sort of on concerns about the Panama Canal or Greenland early on, and some of the statements that came out on that. But for whether it's Marco Rubio himself, who is the Secretary of State, Chris Landa, the Deputy Secretary of State, is a former ambassador to Mexico. This is a very Latin America heavy, focused administration. Now, one thing they've done is using the U.S. military to do these strikes against targets, against boats which are carrying, they say are carrying drugs, weapons, and other illicit activity.
Yeah.
There've been at least 10 strikes on vessels embarking from Venezuela and Colombia. And that has led to casualties. And it's led to questions about, how much of this is a Coast Guard issue, how much of this is a U.S. military issue. So that's really, we've seen a sort of drumbeat of that building up. Last week, exactly a week ago, Trump ordered aircraft carrier battle group to Gerald Ford to actually go off Venezuela.
It's
and that is seen as
deal.
That's seen as sort of escalation, because again, the carrier battle group is like a floating military base. It's huge.
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. Yeah.
And with all the support around it. So a lot of it, the ostensible reason is to counter this, but there's much more going on here.
So it's not just about drugs. I mean, there's something obviously bigger going on here.
Yeah, just a little bit of background. So Venezuela in particular, Venezuela is sitting on the largest proven oil reserves of any country. It's massive, more than Saudi Arabia.
Oh, wow.
And for many years, it was led by Hugo Chavez, who was a sort of charismatic, sort of left-leaning populist leader. And it's just interesting to see Venezuela a while ago was the richest country in South America per capita. It is now one of the poorest countries. And it's really sort of a testament to sort of the economic mismanagement of that country. It's led to a big outflow of migrants, many of whom have come to the United States. And Venezuelan Americans, like Cuban Americans, tend to be pretty right-wing and supportive of the Republican Party. So there's a domestic political component to it here in the United States as well. So there's been this migration outflow. It has been tied into this war on drugs as well, although that's mostly been focused on Colombia. But there's been this issue about whether the Chavez was succeeded by his vice president Maduro, who's now the leader and has been for some time now. Successive U.S. governments have to different degrees supported opposition leaders and opposition parties to the Chavez regime, including inviting them to the United States. At one of the State of the Union addresses, you had Juan Guaido, who was at that time the opposition leader. You had another opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, win the Nobel Peace Prize this year that drew more attention to that. Yep. So there's been this sort of disputed election last year, a sort of a sizable opposition movement, and yet that has remained. So the real question that is on people's mind is this sort of really aggressive steps towards some kind of regime change or attempt at sort of toppling the Maduro government there.
Yeah, it kind of seems like everyone's wondering if we're going to try to do a coup, which goes against the peace-loving president that Donald Trump and his team have said that they are. I don't think that's that's not what I think is happening here, but it's a really big question on people's minds, it seems like.
Yeah, so what I think this is part of a trend that we're going to see of, in some ways, geopolitics returning to Latin America after a sort of 25, 30-year hiatus, really since the end of the Cold War. And there are a few layers to this. One, China is playing a bigger role. They've invested in Peru. In many countries in Latin America don't see China as a geopolitical challenge in the way that many in Asia and Europe do. So, it's going to be mostly on economic issues. The politics has become very polarized in Latin America, right? So you have these right-wing leaders like Milei in Argentina, in Bukele in El Salvador, who tie their political fortunes quite closely to a sort of Trumpist movement in the United States. Yeah. And then you have the sort of opposite of that, like so Lula in Brazil, he's worried about the resurgence of Bolsonaro, who is seen as a sort of Trumpist-like figure. And so this kind of interesting set of alliances, if you will, political alliances is also emerging in Latin America with political parties in each country sort of arrayed on both sides of that divide. And then, a couple of sort of other sort of interesting things changing this up. So Venezuela has made claims to a very large section of neighboring Guyana. It's a region called Essequibo, because it is it's a sparsely populated and oil-rich region. And if you look at a map, it's a pretty big chunk of the country. And that's led to Guyana is now one of the, sort of a new oil exporter, a major oil exporter. So suddenly, again, you've had this sort of geopolitical tensions coming in. Weirdly, Guyana has a very large Indian population.
Interesting.
About more than 30%, and the current leader is of Indian origin. And so there's now been this sort of, again, the interesting geopolitics of this, where countries sort of backing one side or the other. There are other countries, including the Caribbean, who are trying to broker an agreement between Guyana and Venezuela on this. So it is sort of heating up in a slow way, and a place to watch over the next few years, but has become a pretty central focus of the Trump administration.
And then just to close on that, what are you going to be looking at next in terms of how the United States is approaching this? It's obviously a priority for Rubio. What's he doing? Who else is looking at this closely?
So it is there. Again, let's see where this goes. And again, it's being caught in a combination of domestic political divisions, both in the United States and across Latin America. Also, again, the geopolitical. But strange things are happening. So in the middle of all of this, early in January, Rick Grenell, who is Trump's special envoy for a multitude of issues, he actually flew in late January, early February to Venezuela and negotiated the release of some Americans there, met with Maduro personally.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So again, all of that is happening at the same time as there seem to be these attempts at the very least, sort of pushing back very aggressively on the Maduro government.
Okay. So, gosh, Rick Grenell, super interesting character.
Yeah,
former Trump ambassador to Germany. He's been all over the place. Someone to watch closely. And obviously, we'll be keeping an eye on all of these developments, and we'll make sure we're keeping you, our listeners, up to date on the latest happenings in geopolitics. Be sure to tune in every Friday for the latest episodes. And as I mentioned in our intro, like and subscribe to our podcast both on Spotify and on YouTube.
As always, thank you for joining us on the Around the World podcast, and we'll see you next week.
See ya.